Hello, everybody. We're going to be talking about some snake species that I found in Missouri today. I'm going to be doing a separate video on the king snakes and a separate video on pit vipers, so you won't see them in this video. I'm going to be trying to cover basically all the species besides those two groups, though. And we're going to start with milk snakes. Everybody loves milk snakes. They're beautiful snakes. They're plentiful in Missouri. I haven't searched, every county of the state, but mostly I was in the say roughly from St. Louis and south. From there is where I was searching for, and I found them, pretty much everywhere I looked. They seem to like the rocky glades, any kind of openings in the forest, where there's, some open area, some grasses and rocks are good places to look. The edges of forest can be okay places to look too. But pretty widespread, pretty common throughout the state. They are, more common in certain areas than others, but pretty much can be found almost anywhere. Next up, we're going to talk about garter snakes and ribbon snakes. The garter snakes are actually a really underappreciated group of snakes, although they're one of the most common species. Pretty much everywhere I looked, I would come across these. In particular, areas near water seem to house them, but I found them really everywhere. And the best examples of them, the prettiest in my opinion, are the ones that have a lot of red on them. I didn't find a lot of these, but I did find quite a few that would have red up and down the sides, and I really like those examples. Now, the western ribbon snake, I also think is a very attractive snake, and really enjoyed finding them. It seems like the ribbon snake is a little bit less common than the garter snake. I found fewer of them, but nonetheless, something you can find in a lot of places. The worm snake's a really beautiful snake. I really enjoy finding these. In some places, you can really find them in large numbers. They seem to be a little bit more shade tolerant than a lot of the other snakes. I could find these more. I mean, they could turn up anywhere, especially depending on earlier in the year when it's not as hot. But I would find these in, maybe like somewhat open woods, partial shade. I could find them there. Could find them out, in the open too, but particularly as it gets hotter and drier, they tend to retreat in more into shaded areas from what I've seen, but can be found in good numbers. Very beautiful snake, and I enjoy those a lot. Also, in that same kind of areas, I would find the earth snakes. The earth snakes are another one that seems to be a little bit more shade tolerant than some of the other snakes, and is willing to retreat into the woodland, I believe, to get more, probably cooler temperatures and a little bit more moisture. Probably is also just easier to find their prey in that environment too. And then there's the line snakes. The line snakes are interesting because in the places I found them to be pretty populous. Like they weren't rare. You would find a lot of them where you found them, but I didn't find them in all that many places. There were lots of places I looked where I never found any line snakes, and then where I did find the line snakes, I tended to find a lot of them. So I would say that they are, a little bit more localized. Certainly not rare, but more localized than a lot of the other snake species. And there's the flathead snake. This is a small snake species that lives under rocks in glade type environments. I didn't find a lot of these. There are many places I searched pretty thoroughly. I never found any flathead snakes there. So kind of interesting, possibly a little bit localized, at least in the areas where I was looking for them. The brown snake is a pretty common snake. It exists. It can exist in a lot of different places. I would say it's probably more common where there's moisture is adequate. In particular, there was one sort of river valley where I found a lot of them in, but they can turn up almost anywhere. Usually, you find them hiding under objects. They're under there to retain moisture. They probably also find a lot of slugs, snails, amphibians, things like that to eat underneath there. But a very common snake, very interesting little snake. Doesn't get very large. The eastern hognose snake is one of my all-time favorite snakes. I just really like these guys. I think they look really cool. They come in a variety of different shades and colors. When they're putting on a threat display, they'll huff and puff and spread their head and can even play dead. So I find these to just be really cool snakes, one of the coolest snakes in the state. Wish I could have found more of them. Unfortunately, I didn't find them all that easy to find. You just never know when they're going to turn up. Sometimes they would turn up under rocks. sometimes just out on the crawl, but not really a snake that I can think of a dependable place where you're going to, go out and feel very confident you're going to find them at any given place or time. You just have to search for them, but they're well worth the effort. This one you're pretty much guaranteed to find if you spend any amount of time looking for snakes in Missouri, and that is the northern water snake. As the name implies, they're generally found pretty close to water. That's the best place to look for them. Is you can find them in drainage ditches, you can find them in lakes and ponds, you can find them in the Mississippi River area, backwaters of that, all kinds of places. You can find these snakes almost anywhere. They get fairly large, and they're actually a pretty interesting snake. Some people say that they're bitey or something. I didn't find them really be all that bad, but yeah, you can find them out in the open. You can look for them with binoculars. You can find them under cover objects that are near water. Should have no problem finding these at all. Another snake I like is the plain belly or yellow belly water snake. These have a little bit of a different distribution in Missouri, so they're not statewide, but where they do occur, they're pretty common, and you shouldn't have too much trouble finding them if you're in the right area. Some of them, as you can see, I put up a couple different examples here. Some of them have more of a plain belly, and some of them do have more of that yellow underside, which is really cool to see. And I like these snakes a lot. They're fun. Again, you can find them. You can look with a pair of binoculars and see them, hanging out on logs, basking stuff, rocks along the shore. Or, if you don't see any out in the open, you can look under cover objects. They'll sometimes be under like pieces of wood near the shore too. The Diamondback water snake's another really cool water snake. These guys get pretty large. Again, they don't have as wide a distribution as the northern water snake does in Missouri, but they still have a pretty good distribution, so you should be able to find them if you drive to within their range and look around. I found these guys different places, most of the time in or near the water, either basking on little logs or stuff or hiding under rocks or logs near the water's edge. I did find some that were leaving a swamp area and were going up into the hillside away from the water, presumably to hibernate up there. But pretty cool snake and well worth looking for. The broadband water snake's a really attractive water snake. Unfortunately, it only reaches into the southeastern part of the state, so it doesn't have a very big distribution in Missouri. But where it occurs, it can be quite numerous and very attractive snake. So, maybe put this one on your list if you haven't seen one. If you don't live in the areas where they occur, it's worth driving to go see them. And like I said, where they do occur, they tend to be somewhat numerous. So you shouldn't have too much trouble finding them once you're in the right spot. The Graham's crayfish snake is a little bit harder to find because it doesn't come out and bask as much like some of the other water snakes do, so you're unlikely to see it just like sitting on a pile of logs basking. You have to look around a little bit harder to find these because they can live in holes and all sorts of places, and they could just be in aquatic vegetation. But what I did is I just searched logs and boards and things that were sort of like right at the edge of the water or partially submerged, and that's how I was able to find them. But take a look at the distribution. They don't occur everywhere in the state, although they do have a pretty good size range. So just take a look at that. Select an area where you might find them, where they're known to be in the range, and then look around for the logs, rocks, boards, anything at or partially submerged would be a good place to try to find them. And that takes us to the black rat snake. The black rat snake is a pretty common snake in Missouri. I think it may actually be called the Texas rat snake there or something. Whatever it is, it's basically the same thing. It's basically a black rat snake. You might find a little bit of brown patterning on some of the ones in Missouri, but most of the ones I found were pretty much jet black. And I found these in a lot of different places. Old weedy fields, things near old cattle pastures. But they also can be in woodland environments too. I found them in some pretty heavily wooded places, hiding out inside of logs and way up in the tops of trees. So they're kind of an interesting snake, and they can inhabit a lot of different areas. You might find them in a field under a board, or you might find them in the top of a tree in a forested area. You just never know. But they're fairly common. I always liked finding them. They're a very large snake. Even found one in a cool sort of wet fern area during the summer. I guess it was, seeking reprieve from the heat. Another species which can actually be confused with the black rat snake is the racer. Now the racer can take more of a like a gray or a bluish hue, but a lot of them are jet black also. So at a glance, if you can't see the underside of them, they can look similar to the black rat snake. Of course, the black rat snake has the checkered underside, so if you can see the underside of the snake, you have no issues determining them. But at a glance, especially if you're not really familiar with these snakes, they can be a little bit confusing. I think the racer is a little bit less arboreal, though. I haven't seen them climbing as much. The racer in particular seems to like open areas, so if there's like a strip or a power line cut between two fields, or between two forests, it'd be a good place to look. Anywhere where there's open fields would be a good place to look. They do like to hide under rocks, but they're also very likely to be out on the crawl during the day as well. So not particularly hard to find, very common. Pretty much everywhere I looked, I would run across these snakes. And the final snake we're going to discuss is the fox snake. Now, I didn't find a lot of these because its distribution in Missouri pretty much stops about where I was starting to look for snakes. It was a little bit further north from where I usually look. So, like I said, I didn't find a lot of these, but really cool snake. Really like finding these snakes. I think they're more a snake of the upper Midwest, so they do range into Missouri, but they kind of stop around the St. Louis area, which is where I started picking up looking, was about there and south. But I did make a couple of trips specifically to look for these snakes. I found them in areas with lots of basically open areas and water. A few forests. I read a paper on these snakes. Apparently, if there's flooding, the forest trees help them grab onto something and keep from being swept away. So the trees may be important, but they were a smaller percentage of the habitat, which was mostly open area and water. The ones in particular I found were hanging out in some rocks near the water. Very cool snake. Like I said, not super common to find in Missouri. I think especially because a lot of the places where herpers tend to be in Missouri is exactly the areas where these snakes are not. So I think that accounts for why we probably don't find some.